Zidlorp sighed, his 3 primary tentacles drooping with exhaustion as he stared at the flickering holographic display. The Galactic Medical Conference was always a bore, but this year's symposium on treating multi-species trauma in low-gravity environments was threatening to liquefy his brainstem from sheer tedium. He glanced around the cavernous auditorium, noting with a mixture of amusement and despair that at least half the attendees appeared to be in various stages of hibernation or catatonia. "And so, esteemed colleagues," droned the presenter, a Vexillian with more titles than sense, "we conclude that the application of quasi-neutronium bandages in TOT-03G environments leads to a 0.0003% increase in cellular regeneration rates for species with carbon-based vascular systems, assuming Boom! The entire building shook, cutting off the presenter mid-sentence and jolting every being in the room to full alertness. Zidlorp's optical stalks swiveled wildly, trying to pinpoint the source of the disturbance. Panicked murmurs rippled through the crowd as the lights flickered ominously. "By the great void," wheezed Dr. Fustklick, Zidlorp's Arcturian colleague. "What in the name of pulsating quasars was that?" Before anyone could hazard a guess, the massive doors at the rear of the auditorium burst open with a thunderous crack. Smoke billowed in, followed by the most terrifying sight Zidlorp had ever witnessed in his 372 cycles of existence. A human. And not just any human. This one was dressed in the tattered remains of what had once been a crisp military uniform, now reduced to smouldering rags that clung stubbornly to its bizarre endoskeletal frame. The Deathworlder's skin was an angry patchwork of burns, cuts, and bruises, with rivulets of red liquid, blood, Zidlorp's training helpfully supplied, oozing from a dozen wounds. The human stumbled forward, leaving a trail of crimson droplets in its wake. Its face. Was that a grin or a grimace? Zidlorp could never tell with these creatures, was contorted in what surely must have been agony. And yet... "Hey, docs," the human slurred, waving a mangled appendage that might have once been an arm. "Any of you fine folks got a Band-Aid? Maybe some of that sweet, sweet alien juice that makes the pain go bye-bye?" The auditorium erupted into chaos. Medics of 100 different species scattered in all directions, their instincts for self-preservation overriding years of training and oaths to do no harm. Zidlorp found himself frozen in place, his gelatinous body quivering with a mixture of terror and morbid fascination. Dr. Fustklick, always the more practical of the two, grabbed Zidlorp with 3 of his manipulator appendages and started dragging him towards the human. "Come on, you spineless blob," he chittered urgently. "We took an oath." As they approached the swaying Deathworlder, Zidlorp's medical training finally kicked in. He extended a tentacle, activating his built-in bioscanner, and nearly fainted at the readings. "Impossible," he gurgled, his voice modulator struggling to convey the sheer disbelief coursing through his synapses. "This being should be dead. Multiple fractures, severe burns, internal bleeding. How is it even standing?" The human, overhearing this, let out a sound that might have been a laugh or a death rattle. With these creatures, it was often hard to tell the difference. "Oh, come on, Doc. It's just a flesh wound. You should see the other guy." Dr. Fustklick's eye stalks swiveled towards each other in the Arcturian equivalent of an eye roll. "Right. Because there's always another guy with you humans. Let's get you to the medical bay before you leak any more of your vital fluids all over this nice sterile floor." As they guided, or more accurately propped up, the human towards the nearest grav lift, Zidlorp couldn't help but notice the trail of destruction left in the Deathworlder's wake. Scorch marks on the walls, shattered display screens, and was that a piece of a spacecraft embedded in the ceiling? "So, human," Zidlorp ventured, his curiosity momentarily overriding his fear. "Might I inquire as to how you came to be in this state?" The human's face contorted into what Quetzalcoatl hoped was a grin, and not the prelude to some sort of violent outburst. "Oh man, Doc, you're gonna love this." So there I was, minding my own business, just taking a nice leisurely stroll through the vacuum of space. "Excuse me," Dr. Firstclick interrupted, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "but did you just say you were taking a leisurely stroll through the vacuum of space?" "Well, yeah," the human replied, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I mean, I was in a ship at the time. Details. Quetzalcoatl and Dr. Firstclick exchanged a look that transcended species barriers, conveying a universal message of, "What have we gotten ourselves into?" As they entered the medical bay, alarms immediately began blaring, sensors overloading from the sheer number of life-threatening injuries detected on their patient. The human, for its part, seemed more amused than concerned. "Ooh, pretty lights," it exclaimed, reaching out to poke at a holographic display of its own mangled skeleton. "Hey, is that my spleen? I've always wondered what that little bugger looked like." Dr. Firstclick quickly swatted the human's hand away with one of his manipulators. "Please refrain from touching the equipment. Some of it is more valuable than the entire GDP of your homeworld." The human pouted. At least, Quetzalcoatl assumed it was a pout. It could have been the onset of massive organ failure for all he knew about human facial expressions. "Aw, you're no fun. I thought alien hospitals would be all zappy zappers and magic healing beams. Where's the part where you stick me in a Bacta tank or whatever?" Quetzalcoatl, who had been frantically calibrating a cellular regenerator, paused to stare at the human in bewilderment. I don't even know what that means. Are you experiencing hallucinations?" "Dr. Firstclick, we may need to check for brain damage." The Arcturian doctor was already one step ahead, waving a neural scanner over the human's cranium. "Bold of you to assume there was a functional brain in there to begin with," he muttered. "Hey," the human protested, wincing as Quetzalcoatl began applying a gelatinous substance to its burns. "I'll have you know I graduated top of my class in the Space Force Academy. Okay, maybe not top. Middle-ish. I was definitely in the top 90%, though." As they worked to stabilize their patient, Quetzalcoatl couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial. The human's injuries were severe, yes, but there was something about the pattern, the sheer scale of the damage. "Human," he ventured. "I don't mean to pry, but what exactly happened out there? These injuries are consistent with exposure to a massive explosion, possibly even a small antimatter detonation." The Deathworlder's face lit up, as if Quetzalcoatl had just offered it a delicious treat instead of inquiring about a near-death experience. "Oh man, it was awesome. So remember how I said I was in a ship? Well, turns out the Zorgax Empire doesn't take too kindly to humans poking around their super-secret bioweapons facility." Dr. Firstclick's manipulators froze in mid-air, a vial of universal antibiotic hanging precariously from one appendage. The Zorgax Empire? As in the most technologically advanced and militaristic species in the known galaxy. That Zorgax Empire? The human nodded enthusiastically, apparently oblivious to the horror dawning on the faces, or equivalent sensory clusters, of its alien caretakers. "Yep, those guys. Real sticklers for privacy, let me tell you. Anyway, long story short, there might have been a teensy-weensy little incident involving me, a stolen Zorgax battlecruiser, and about half a ton of antimatter." Quetzalcoatl felt his gelatinous body sag, gravity suddenly seeming much stronger than usual. Half a ton of antimatter? But that's enough to vaporize a small moon," the human finished, grinning from ear to ear. "Yeah, it was pretty epic. You should have seen the fireworks. Well, I guess technically I didn't see much of it either, what with the blinding flash and the whole being propelled through space by a massive shockwave thing." Dr. Firstclick's eye stalks had retreated so far into his carapace that Quetzalcoatl worried they might never re-emerge. You You destroyed a Zorgax battlecruiser? Do you have any idea what you've done? This could start an interstellar war." The human waved a dismissive hand, narrowly avoiding smacking QX's in one of his sensory clusters. "Nah, it'll be fine. If anything, they should be thanking me. I mean, who builds a bioweapons facility right next to an antimatter storage depot? That's just asking for trouble. Really, I did them a favor by exposing such a glaring safety violation." QX and Dr. Fazit Click exchanged another long-suffering look. The Arcturian sighed, all 4 of his lungs deflating simultaneously. "Right, of course. How silly of us to worry about trivial matters like galactic politics when there are safety regulations to consider." As they continued patching up the human, a process that involved liberal use of organ regenerators, bone knitters, and enough painkillers to sedate a Jovian mega whale, QX found his scientific curiosity getting the better of him. "I must admit," he burbled, carefully applying a dermal regenerator to a particularly nasty plasma burn, "I'm astounded by your species' resilience. By all rights, you shouldn't have survived that explosion, let alone made it to our medical facility." The human shrugged, a motion that elicited a series of alarming cracks and pops from its battered frame. You know what they say. Whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Or in this case, whatever doesn't kill you leaves you with some gnarly scars and a cool story to tell at space bars." Dr. Fistclick's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. "That's not how biology works. You can't just shrug off exposure to hard vacuum, extreme G-forces, and antimatter radiation." "Well, not with that attitude, you can't," the human replied with a wink. As the treatment progressed, more and more alien medical personnel began to filter back into the facility, drawn by a mixture of professional duty and morbid curiosity. Soon, a small crowd had gathered around the medical bay, whispering and gesticulating as they watched the miracle, or nightmare, depending on one's perspective, of human durability on full display. One brave Xinthian doctor, her tentacles quivering with a mixture of fear and excitement, approached the group. "Excuse me," she warbled, "but is it true what they're saying? That this human survived an antimatter explosion?" The Deathworlder, who had been uncharacteristically quiet for the past few minutes, a blessed relief in Cuxilorp's opinion, perked up at the question. "Sure did. Want to see my souvenir?" Before anyone could stop him, the human reached into what remained of its uniform and pulled out something. It was small, metallic, and emitting an ominous humming sound that set every alien's danger receptors on high alert. Dr. Fast Click let out a strangled screech. "Is that... Please tell me that's not a piece of Zorgax antimatter containment technology." The human nodded proudly, holding up the device for all to see. "Yep, cool, right? I figured it'd make a neat paperweight, or maybe a really intense nightlight." The medical bay erupted into chaos once again. Doctors and nurses of all species scrambled for the exits, their self-preservation instincts finally overcoming their professional curiosity. Cuxilorp found himself rooted to the spot, his gelatinous body quivering with a mixture of terror and resignation. "Put that down." Dr. Fustclick's voice had taken on a dangerous edge, all 4 of his eyes focused intently on the humming device. Slowly, very, very slowly. The human, finally seeming to grasp the gravity of the situation, or perhaps just enjoying the reaction it had elicited, carefully placed the antimatter containment fragment on a nearby tray. All right, no need to get your tentacles in a twist. I was just trying to lighten the mood." Cuxilorp felt a hysterical laugh bubble up from his central air sac. "Lighten the mood? You brought a piece of highly unstable, highly illegal Zorgax technology into a medical conference. Do you have any idea what would happen if that containment field were to fail?" The human scratched its head, wincing as it accidentally reopened a newly healed cut. Big boom?" "Big boom," Dr. Fistclick confirmed, his voice dripping with sarcasm. big enough to take out this entire space station and a good chunk of the surrounding stellar system. Honestly, how has your species not managed to accidentally wipe itself out yet? The Deathworlder grinned, an expression that Kunzelorp was beginning to associate with impending disaster. Oh, we've come close a few times, but you know what they say. Humanity's greatest strength is its ability to look at certain death and say, "Nah, I think I'll pass." As if on cue, a piercing alarm began to sound throughout the medical bay. Red lights flashed, and a computerized voice began calmly announcing, "Warning, unstable antimatter signature detected. Please evacuate immediately. This is not a drill. Warning, unstable antimatter signature detected." The human had the decency to look slightly sheepish. Oops. Kunzelorp felt his entire body deflate, his gelatinous form sagging towards the floor. This is it. This is how I die. Not peacefully in my hibernation pod, not heroically saving lives on some far-flung colony world. No, I meet my end because a Deathworlder decided to bring a souvenir from its latest suicidal adventure to a medical conference. Dr. Fizzclick, however, seemed to have moved past fear and straight into a sort of manic determination. His manipulators flew over the medical bay's control panels, bringing up schematics and readouts faster than Kunzelorp's eye stalks could follow. "Not today," the Arcturian muttered. "I did not spend 8 cycles in xenobiology school just to be vaporized by some human's idea of a paperweight. Kunzelorp, get me the quantum stabilizer from storage room B. Human, don't touch anything." As Kunzelorp hurried to retrieve the requested equipment and silently cursed his life choices, he couldn't help but overhear the human's attempt at conversation with Dr. Fizzclick. "So, Doc, on a scale of 1 to total universal annihilation, how bad is this situation?" The Arcturian's reply was terse, his focus never wavering from the control panel. "Imagine the worst thing you've ever done. Now multiply that by the population of your home planet. Then square it. We're somewhere in that neighborhood." "Ah," the human replied, nodding sagely. "So, Tuesday then?" Dr. Fizzclick's eye stalks swiveled towards the Deathworlder, radiating a mixture of disbelief and exasperation. "Your species' ability to make light of impending doom is both fascinating and deeply, deeply troubling." Kunzelorp returned, his gelatinous form quivering with exertion as he lugged the quantum stabilizer into the room. The device was a marvel of alien engineering, a sleek, pulsating orb that hummed with barely contained energy. "Ah, excellent," Dr. Fizzclick exclaimed, his manipulators already reaching for the stabilizer. "Now, if my calculations are correct, and they'd better be, or we're all about to become very interesting subatomic particles, this should neutralize the antimatter reaction." The human leaned in, its eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and what Kunzelorp could only assume was the alien emotion known as excitement. "Ooh, shiny, what does it do? Can I press the button?" "No!" both alien doctors shouted in unison, their voices harmonizing in a perfect chord of panic. Dr. Fizzclick carefully positioned the quantum stabilizer next to the humming piece of Zorgak's technology. "This device creates a localized field that should, emphasis on should, prevent the antimatter from interacting with normal matter. In theory, it will buy us enough time to dispose of this souvenir properly." As the Arcturian worked, Kunzelorp found himself morbidly fascinated by the human's reaction to their impending doom. While every other being on the station was no doubt in a state of blind panic, this Deathworlder seemed almost entertained. "You know," the human mused, watching Dr. Fizzclick's delicate manipulations with unnerving intensity, "this reminds me of this one time on Proxima Centauri 4. There I was, deep in the methane swamps, when my envirosuit sprung a leak. Had to MacGyver a fix using nothing but a piece of alien fungus and my own spit. Good times." Kunzelorp felt his primary stomach churn at the mental image. I fail to see how that situation is in any way comparable to our current predicament. The human grinned, an expression that still sent shivers down Q-Xlop's dorsal ridge. Oh, it's not really. I just like telling that story. Makes for great first date material, you know. Before Q-Xlop could formulate a response to that baffling statement, Dr. Fsart let out a triumphant chirp. It's working. The antimatter signature is stabilizing. We might just survive this yet. As if on cue, the blaring alarms quieted, replaced by a soothing computerized voice. Antimatter containment restored. Threat level reduced to minimal. You may now return to your regularly scheduled medical tedium. A collective sigh of relief echoed through the medical bay, the sound of 100 different species expressing gratitude in their own unique ways. Q-Xlop felt his gelatinous form sag, the tension of the past few minutes finally releasing. The human, however, seemed almost disappointed. "Oh, is that it? I was kind of hoping for a more exciting conclusion. Maybe a last-second escape in an escape pod, or a heroic sacrifice, or—" "No!" Q-Xlop and Dr. Fsart shouted in unison, their voices tinged with equal parts relief and exasperation. Dr. Fsart carefully secured the now stable piece of Zorgax technology in a containment field. "I think we've all had quite enough excitement for one galactic standard day, thank you very much. Now, if you don't mind, I believe we still have the small matter of your numerous life-threatening injuries to attend to." The human glanced down at its battered body, as if just remembering the reason it had stumbled into the medical conference in the first place. "Oh, right. I almost forgot about those. Say, Doc, you wouldn't happen to have any of that good stuff that makes you feel like you're floating through a nebula made of cotton candy, would you?" Q-Xlop exchanged a weary look with his Arcturian colleague. "I'll prepare a dose of omnimorphine. Dr. Fsart, perhaps you could, I don't know, find something to keep our guest occupied? Preferably something that doesn't involve antimatter explosions or any form of galactic peril." As Q-Xlop busied himself with the medication, he couldn't help but overhear snippets of conversation between the human and Dr. Fsart. "So, Doc, you ever heard of this little game we humans like to call Operation? I bet with those fancy manipulators of yours you'd be a natural." "I assure you, I have no interest in human entertainment, especially not anything that combines the words game and operation." "Oh, come on. It'll be fun. We can use some of that weird alien medical tech as the pieces. Ooh, is that a laser scalpel? Can I?" "Don't touch anything." Q-Xlop returned with the omnimorphine, administering it to the human with a mixture of relief and trepidation. As the powerful painkiller took effect, the Deathworlder's eyes glazed over, a dopey grin spreading across its face. "Woo!" the human slurred, its gaze fixed on some point far beyond the medical bay walls. "You guys ever notice how, like, space is really, really big, and we're all just tiny little specks floating in this cosmic soup of awesomeness?" Dr. Fsart's eye stalks retreated slightly into his carapace, a sure sign of impending exasperation. "Oh, joy! It's achieving enlightenment. Quick, Q-Xlop, ready the philosophy suppression field before it starts quoting ancient Earth wisdom at us." But Q-Xlop found himself oddly moved by the human's drug-induced musings. "You know," he burbled thoughtfully, "in all the excitement, I don't believe we ever asked your name, human." The Deathworlder's unfocused gaze swiveled towards Q-Xlop, a lopsided grin plastered across its face. "Oh man, names are weird, aren't they? Like, who decided we needed to call ourselves things? Why can't we just be, you know?" Dr. Fsart's mandibles clicked rapidly in irritation. Fascinating. Truly the depths of human philosophical inquiry know no bounds. Now, if we could please focus on the task at hand. "But you can call me Max," the human interrupted, its mood shifting with the rapidity that Q-Xlop was beginning to associate with these baffling creatures. short for Maximilian Danger Thrusterson III, scourge of the Zorgax Empire, bane of antimatter containment fields, and occasional saviour of distressed alien princesses. There was a moment of stunned silence in the medical bay, broken only by the soft hum of medical equipment and the distant sounds of the space station slowly returning to normal operations. "You're joking," Dr. Festklick said flatly, all four of his eyes narrowing in suspicion. "That cannot possibly be your real name." Max, if that was indeed the human's name, attempted to strike a heroic pose, an effect somewhat ruined by the fact that he was still strapped to a medical bed and pumped full of alien painkillers. "I assure you, good doctor, every word of it is true." "Well, except for the Thrusterson part. I added that because it sounded cool. And the third bit. Oh, and I've only saved, 2 alien princesses. 3 tops." QX's Lorp felt a strange sensation bubbling up from his central air sac. Was this what humans called laughter? "I must admit, Max, you are unlike any being I've encountered in my many cycles of medical practice." "Oh, thanks, Doc," Max beamed, reaching out to pat QX's Lorp on what he probably thought was a shoulder, but was actually a secondary sensory cluster. "You're not so bad yourself, for a talking blob of space jello." As Dr. Festklick busied himself with final scans and treatments, Kixlorp found himself contemplating the strange twist of fate that had brought this human crashing into their lives. In the span of a few short hours, Max had managed to disrupt a galactic medical conference, nearly cause an antimatter explosion, and turn everything Kixlorp thought he knew about xenobiology on its head. And yet, there was something undeniably compelling about the Deathworlder's spirit. A resilience, a zest for life that seemed to defy the very laws of physics. It was terrifying, yes, but also oddly inspiring. "Hey, Doc," Max's voice cut through QXlorp's reverie, the human's tone suddenly serious despite the influence of the omnimorphine. "I just wanted to say thanks, for not letting me explode and stuff, and for patching me up. You guys are all right." QXlorp felt a warm glow spread through his gelatinous form, an emotion he couldn't quite name, but suspected might be akin to what humans called pride. "You are welcome, Max," he replied, his voice modulator struggling to convey the complex mix of emotions swirling through his synapses. "Though perhaps in the future you could consider less explosive methods of introducing yourself to new species." Max's face split into a wide grin, his eyes twinkling with a mixture of mischief and what Kixlorp was beginning to recognize as the human emotion of affection. "Now where's the fun in that?" the Deathworlder quipped. "Besides, you got to admit, this makes for one hell of a story to tell at the next Galactic Medical Conference. I bet that beats listening to lectures on quasi-neutronium bandages any day." As if on cue, a frazzled-looking Vexillian burst into the medical bay, his numerous appendages flailing in agitation. "Esteemed colleagues, I've been looking everywhere for you. We still have 3 more hours of presentations on multi-species trauma in low-gravity environments to get through." The look of sheer horror that passed between QXlorp, Dr. Festklick, and Max was a moment of perfect interspecies understanding. Dr. Festklick said slowly, his eye stalks swiveling towards the still unconscious conference attendees in the main auditorium. "Perhaps our time would be better spent conducting a practical demonstration of our emergency response protocols." Kixlorp caught on quickly, his gelatinous form quivering with barely suppressed excitement. "Oh, yes, absolutely. A hands-on workshop on treating, antimatter-induced traumatic deceleration injury in Deathworlders," Max supplied helpfully, already attempting to sit up despite the numerous tubes and sensors still attached to his battered frame. The Vexillian presenter looked between the 3 of them, his expression a mixture of confusion and growing interest. "I suppose that could be educational, but we don't have any case studies prepared or—" "Oh, don't you worry about that," Max interjected, his grin widening to truly alarming proportions. Boy, do I have a story for you. Picture this. There I was, minding my own business in low orbit around a Zorgax bioweapons facility. As Max launched into his tail, gesticulating wildly and only occasionally wincing as he pulled at his newly healed wounds, Quetzalcoatl settled in for what promised to be the most interesting and possibly terrifying medical presentation of his career. After all, he mused, watching as a crowd of fascinated alien doctors began to gather around the animated human, sometimes the best way to learn was by diving headfirst into the unknown. And if there was one thing Max had taught him, it was that the unknown was far more exciting and survivable than he'd ever imagined. Quetzalcoatl made a mental note to update the Galactic Medical Handbook section on human physiology. Clearly, their current understanding of Deathworlder resilience was woefully inadequate. And who knew? Perhaps this strange encounter was the beginning of a beautiful, if slightly explosive, friendship between species. As Max's story reached its climactic antimatter detonation, complete with sound effects and a disturbingly accurate impression of a Zorgax battlecruiser commander, Quetzalcoatl couldn't help but feel a twinge of excitement for what the future might hold. One thing was certain. Life in the galaxy had just gotten a whole lot more interesting.